Joining me now, Republican Congressman Mo Brooks of Alabama and Jared Bernstein, former chief economist of Vice President Biden and MSNBC contributor. Congressman Brooks, what is going on here?
Well, you've got democracy at work.
I guess we do.
You've got a very serious threat to our future with these unsustainable deficits. We're in our perhaps fifth consecutive trillion-dollar deficit year, total accumulated debt of $16 trillion, no end in sight. And so you have a long-term threat that we have to focus our eyes on, but we also have a short-term threat, and that is raising the debt ceiling or not raising the debt ceiling. No question.
You going to vote for the Boehner plan?
No, I am not.
Why not?
Well, let's get to the long-term threat. I want to do whatever is necessary to avoid or minimize the risk of a federal government insolvency and bankruptcy. To me, that would be debilitating to our country, devastating to our economy, far worse than any economic period seen in the history of the United States. In my judgment, if the federal government becomes insolvent or goes into bankruptcy because the debt burden has accumulated to such a great extent that it's overwhelmed our ability to pay. In that context, then, I'm willing to vote to raise the debt ceiling if one of two things will happen. First, a balanced budget constitutional amendment must pass the United States Congress and be sent to the people.
Okay, that's not going to happen. What's the other one?
No, it could happen.
Never
I disagree.
Happened. What's the other one?
Well, it may not, certainly if we don't try.
Right.
And then the second one is substantial spending cuts or something.
That's not going to happen either. According to John Boehner, that's not going to happen either.
A sincere effort to try to address the underlying cause of the problem. The underlying cause of the problem of having to raise the debt ceiling are these trillion-dollar-a-year deficits that everybody agrees are unsustainable.
We get that position from Republicans. I'm trying to get at what has happened within the Republican Congress in the House such that the day after the inauguration, the Republican leadership is saying, let's not raise the debt ceiling. Let's pretend we simply do not have one and do that for a period of months. Is that thing going to get the votes? That's the question Luke Russert asked.
Well, I'm not on the whip team, so I can't give you a firm answer. I know that there will be no votes from Republicans, and there will be yes votes for Republicans. I have no idea what the Democrats will do.
That's the question, Jared. What do Democrats do in this situation? Should they vote for this thing, which, by the way, contains some crazy provision about congressional pay, which is completely unconstitutional?
Correct.
Describe what this provision does on congressional pay.
Well, which I disagree with. I concur with you that it's probably
wildly unconstitutional.
Okay, I concur with the view.
It suspends their pay as long as they don't pass a budget?
It puts their pay in escrow until basically the next Congress if they don't pass a budget. Look,
let me just read one thing from the Constitution of the United States.
When he uses the word they,
no law varying the compensation for the services of senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. You can't pass a law about your pay during that Congress.
With great respect to the congressman here, I'm not an elected official. What I hear him saying is we have a very difficult budget situation, and therefore we have to go full speed into total dysfunction. And I just don't see how those pieces add up. I mean, if you're really serious about trying to do something about the deficit, which is, by the way, a medium long-term problem versus the economy, which is a near-term problem, then you shouldn't be screwing around with the budget, with the fiscal cliff and the debt ceiling in the first place. In fact, all that messing around with the debt ceiling does is threaten to raise our interest rates, make them higher so our creditors insist on an interest rate premium. It makes things much worse. If you want to talk about stabilizing the debt, which I would hope you and I would agree would be a goal, then we have to talk about raising $1.2 trillion over the next 10 years, because we already have over $2 trillion of deficit reduction in the bank through spending cuts and through tax increases. That $1.2 trillion is not that heavy a lift with a functional Congress, but we can't get there if we're playing around with this kind of crazy legislation that you yourself are not going to vote for.
Congressman Brooks, remember when you guys got the House back from Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, and the first thing you did was go out there on the floor and read the Constitution, and the new rule was going to be every piece of legislation comes with a constitutional explanation.
Hey,
And now, here you are,
you get a choice
straight
of which side to
violation of the 27th Amendment.
You give me a choice of which side to argue before a court. I'm arguing that this is
It
unconstitutional.
sounds like complete disarray up there. Boehner and Cantor go forward with this thing that doesn't have your vote. As far as you can tell, you don't know. And Boehner won't say that he has the votes. Democrats aren't sure. What should we do with this thing? Should we vote for it so that it kind of gives us some breathing room, or should we continue with this chaos? But it is chaos, isn't it? Isn't that what it feels like up there?
Well, there's always a degree of uncertainty associated with an elected body. Well, no,
Not this much.
This is a little different.
I have been in elected office off and on since 1982, okay, in the Alabama legislature and here in the United States Congress. And there is always a crisis. It is always accompanied by some degree of uncertainty as to how it's going to be addressed. Now, there are varying degrees of uncertainty. Certainly, this is up near the top of the list.
Wait a second,
but it's always that way.
The debt ceiling has been increased since the 1960s by, I think, 80 times, including 18 times over Ronald Reagan's tenure. The only time we had this kind of chaos over the debt ceiling was in 2011, the last time we ran up against this.
Time out for a second. We have never had this kind of series of unsustainable budget deficits that threaten the future.
We have had
World War II.
Correct.
But aside from that,
World War II,
in relative peacetime, we have never had this kind of threat to the solvency of the United States of America, and we are to a point.
So I disagree.
No, wait a second. You can disagree. That's fine.
Go ahead.
So let me finish.
Yeah.
We have to act. Now, I would love to act in a more accommodating way, but we've got a president who does not seem to care about deficits and debt. He'll mouthpiece a little bit.
That's not true. Put the president aside.
No, it is true.
You're in a good place here. Let me talk to you about this.
I have seen this gentleman who's in the White House act as he has acted now for 4 years, and he could have done a lot of things concerning the deficit and the debt.
Let me just ask you.
House. He controlled the United States Senate.
I hear you. We don't have much time, so let's talk about action.
Instead, he chose to rack up $1 trillion deficits.
Put the talking points and the president aside, and let's talk about how we get from where we are to where we need to be. I think this is going to pass tomorrow, and I think once that passes, we have a number of months, and I would say you and your colleagues have a number of months to achieve something that we can achieve, that the president himself has put forward: a sustainable debt to GDP ratio over the next 10 years. It includes $1.2 trillion more of deficit savings. I would love to see you and your members put all of this nonsense aside and work on that goal, half on the revenue side, half on the spending cut side. Do you think that's something Congress could contemplate?
It is not anything at all that the Democrats have shown a willingness to agree to, unless you're talking in terms of spending cuts, the number one priority of the federal government, which is national defense. What other spending cuts have they risen to the top with?
So the president, the president has
substantive spending cuts. The
president, first of all, they've already cut, and not just they, you guys have already cut $1.5 trillion in spending from lowering discretionary caps. Secondly, the president has put $400 billion on the table in spending cuts and entitlements, going outside the comfort zone of a lot of Democrats, by the way. So concrete cuts on the table, offered to John Boehner in mid-December.
Specific entitlement programs that the president is going to take a lead on and cutting.
Medicare. He put Medicare on the table, and he put Social Security.
Okay, Obamacare took.
Can you guys continue this conversation during the break? And when you go back up to the Hill, can you give John Boehner my copy of the 27th Amendment on congressional pay?
I can assure you he's already read it.
Congressman Mo Brooks and Jared Bernstein, thank you both very much for joining me tonight. Coming up.